Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. A phrase that everyone who has entered into the Sufi path hears within a short time is that to know yourself is to know your Lord, or you must know yourself in order to know your Lord. And we are all aware that Allah has placed a soul inside of each of us. And that soul is a spark of Allah. So we all have a spark from Allah inside of our being. So we have a connection to divinity. Now, there is the self, and then there is the divine. Imagine the ocean, and imagine taking a cup and putting it into the ocean and pulling out a cup of salt water from the ocean. Now, the cup of water is not the ocean, but it is from the ocean, and it is part of the ocean, but it certainly isn't the ocean. So we are part of the divine. We are certainly not the divine, but we are part of the divine. And we are in two parts. One part is this elemental body, and the other part is this divine spark. Now, to understand the divine spark, we have to understand this elemental body. And the first part that we have to understand about this body is that it is a creation. It is not something that has always been in being. Unlike Allah. Allah is always, has always, is always, will always be in being. He is the eternal, and he is from the effulgence of himself. We are his created being. And between ourselves and Allah, there are all these veils that separate us from understanding and knowing the truth of Allah and the truth of our Creator. And what creates these veils? Why is it that we're separated from our Lord? What keeps us separated from him? In reality, we as created beings are extremely arrogant. We think that we somehow maintain our existence, and we do not. We have qualities such as arrogance, egocentricity, egoism, self-love, self-aggrandizement. We make ourselves big. We make ourselves important. My teacher, Muhammad Muhaiyaddeen, would often say, I am the smallest, most discarded creature in all of the universe. What he was saying to us, if we followed and understood, is that he was very, very small. And in his smallness, he was able to find Allah. In our grandiosity, we are not able to find Allah because we are too much involved with the self. We are too much involved with the artificial creation to be able to find the natural, effulgent, everlasting. So our focus somehow needs to shift. But in the shifting of our focus, there has to become a shift in our attitude and a shift in the way that we perceive our reality. If we perceive our reality as moving our way through this world and pushing and pulling things and making things happen, then we see ourselves as big, as important, as powerful. But if we see ourselves as a creation, totally dependent on our Creator for our breath, for our food, for our sustenance, for our sight, for our speech, for every part of us, then all of a sudden we alter in attitude and we alter in the way we are. We alter our perception of things. We alter the way we look at ourselves. We begin to know the truth about who we are. And as long as we are in a view of ourselves that isn't real, the veils that separate ourselves from our Lord are going to continue to be there because we don't get rid of them. We don't turn them off. We don't take them away from ourselves. As long as we have a view of ourselves as large, as important, as the doer of things, we will not find our Lord because we don't know ourselves. To know ourselves, we have to become transparent and disappear. And as we become transparent and smaller and smaller and smaller, that spark, that cup of ocean, that spark of the divine that is within us will become more visible to us and become a greater part of our being. And as it is uncovered, it connects back to the ocean of divinity that it came from. But as long as it's hidden by ourself, that connection doesn't come into existence. So we, as created individuals, we as arrogant, egotistic beings have to be rid of this arrogance. We have to be rid of this egotism. We have to be rid of the fact that we believe that we are the actors on this stage. We have to stop believing that we are the ones performing, and we have to understand that all of the performances come through Allah, through us. Now, the question becomes, is the performance that we do on this stage representative of our Lord or representative of something else? We choose to make that decision, and we choose the performance that we give. So imagine that you are an actor on a stage and you choose your role. Now, what happens is that because of our outside influences, the influence of our parents, the influences of our teachers, the influences of our peers, our friends, the influences of all of the people that we know, we are molded in a certain way, and we are given a certain inclination and direction to move forward in and to go in. But this isn't necessarily an appropriate direction. This isn't necessarily the right way to go. This also isn't necessarily a method with any truth in it. It isn't an act with any truth in it. It's an act that's derived from our culture, from our arrogance, from our egocentric self, from our mind and desire. Now, in the levels of consciousness, we go from animal to wise, animal to wisdom, animal consciousness to divine consciousness, to a loving consciousness. Now, if we remain at the level of animal, we are going to have an animal consciousness. And with an animal consciousness, we are going to be entirely wrapped up in taking care of this physical body, in taking care of ourselves, in somehow moving ourselves forward in this world, to make ourselves more important, to make ourselves more prominent, to make ourselves more satisfied, to fulfill the desires that this animal body has. So, unless we somehow shift from animal consciousness to wisdom, we are going to continue to act like an animal. And the progression to become other than animal isn't going to happen. What is the intent of our acts? What is the reason we do things? What's the purpose behind what we're doing? When we speak, what are we actually thinking in the back of our head, in our mind? When we interact with people, what's actually going on in our mind? And what is the motive? Do we interact with people to get something for ourselves? Do we interact with people to make ourselves bigger? Do we interact with people to avoid blame and get praise? Do we interact with people to somehow put them in their place so that we become more powerful? Or have we stopped all of these animal interactions? All of the animal interactions have to do with ourselves trying to take care of ourselves to the expense of everybody else and everything else and everything else. There is no thought of the divine in the animal self. The animal self is fully occupied with this body and taking care of this body. So, if you're going to become wise, first, you have to know yourself. You have to know your motives. You have to know why you do things. You have to know what your purpose is. You have to know the reason for your actions. You have to know your intention. And this has to be done without creating layers. Part of what we do when we try to get to know ourselves is to go through the different layers that we have so that we get to the essence of why we do things and the essence of who we are. And we can find various things. We might find that we do things to hide our shame. We might do things to empower ourselves. We might do things to make ourselves more wealthy. We might do things to make ourselves more powerful, to give ourselves more titles, to have more prominence in society. There are so many different reasons that man does things, but all of these relate to the egocentric self and making the egocentric self more important and fulfilling the desires of the egocentric self. So the mind becomes a tool to fulfill desire. And if you are constantly working in this world with the animal mind, you'll find, if you look closely, that the animal mind deals with the elemental and trying to arrange the elemental in such a way that it fulfills your intentions and your needs and your desires. So, the elemental mind's purpose is to figure out ways to get you what you want, to get you what you want in the elemental world. Allah is not in the elemental world. Allah isn't found in the elements. He's other than the elements. Allah is the natural effulgent thing that came about before everything, that was before everything. He wasn't created, he was. And he was and is in the effulgence. He is simultaneously with us while we are in the elemental world. And we are caught between the dichotomy of the elemental world and the world of effulgence, the world of the non-elemental. But what controls our relationship is our intention. What controls our relationship is the nature of our desire. What controls our relationship is what we consider important and what it is that we have at the forefront of our consciousness, not at the back of our consciousness, but at the forefront. So, if all we're thinking about is what we're going to eat next, we are not looking for God. If what we're thinking about is where we're going to travel to next, we're not thinking about God. If our purpose is women or men, we're not thinking about God. Somehow, this intention has to be altered. And we have to become separated from this egocentric self. And as we separate from this egocentric self, the veils between ourselves and the divine spark that is in us disappear. And as these veils disappear, we become closer to the truth. But in the world, Satan is always whispering in our ear and trying to bring us back into the elemental world. The elemental world itself has great hypnotic and magnetic powers that pull us towards it and try to keep us in this elemental world. So somehow we have to become inert to all of these pulls and pushes. The word inert means not attracted to, not being capable of being magnetized to. We have no, there's nothing in us that gets pulled in that direction. And we should understand that as long as we have desire, as long as we have intention for things in the world, there are things in the world that will pull that intention and pull that desire to bring us closer to the world. There's a story of a sheikh who had a small gathering around him. And he used to sit and stroke his beard all day long. And he thought a lot of himself. And his little group of students sat in front of him and worshiped him. They were very close to him. One day, one of the truly great sheikhs was traveling through the vicinity, and everybody became very excited. And they said to him, the sheikh, that this great sheikh is coming. You should meet him. He should see you and understand who you are, and you can understand who he is. That would be important. And he said to them, I'll only come if he invites me. I don't go anywhere just as a stranger. So the dervishes got together, and when the great sheikh came in town, they went to see him, and they told him about their sheikh. And they said, he'll only come if you invite him. And you should invite him because he's truly a great man. And the great sheikh said, I don't know. When I look into it, all I see is that he's constantly stroking his beard. That seems to be the extent of his greatness. But I'll give him an invitation. And he wrote out an invitation, and they gave it to the sheikh, and he came to see the great sheikh. And while the sheikh is sitting in front of the great sheikh, all of a sudden his veils began to lift, and he began to understand himself better, and he began to see his own arrogance, and he was playing with his beard. And the great sheikh says, see, he's still just playing with his beard. And the other sheikh said, it's true. And he started to rip his beard out. And then the great sheikh says, even now, you're still playing with your beard. We have to learn to stop playing with our beards. Now, women, we can talk about your hair instead of your beards, but it's the same point. We have to stop playing with the world and giving it importance. And we can't think that relieving ourselves of our beard or throwing things away is going to bring us closer to true intention, is going to bring us closer to lifting the veils that separate us from our Lord. This is an internal matter that has to be done internally with our intention and with our ideas of what is actually going on. This cannot be done externally. You can't reach God by burning down your house. You can't reach God by giving away your money. You can't reach God through these external acts. Of course, things like charity and things like fasting help, but there has to be more than that. Lots of people give charity so that other people will say, look at him. He has his name on the mosque or the synagogue or the church. He's a very, very generous man. And they don't give the money for the sake of generosity. They give the money for the sake of their own being made bigger, for the sake of their own aggrandizement. So here you are giving charity, but in essence, all you're doing is making your egocentric self bigger, even though you assume you're doing positive things. And in a way, it is positive, but it isn't truly positive. True charity is anonymous. True charity happens through the heart. It doesn't happen through the mind for some kind of return. As we drive through Philadelphia, we see all kinds of charitable institutions that have people's names on them. Well, those people's names got on them because those people gave a lot of money. But when you drive by, you also see that person's name. And every time you see that person's name somewhere, that does more to keep them separate from Allah. So we, in order to truly begin to know who we are, have to stop thinking with the animal mind. We have to think through wisdom. Now, the animal mind is critical and analytical. It goes over things and over things and over things and critiques them. And through this process of analyzing and critiquing, it thinks that it comes to appropriate conclusions. Wisdom is different. Wisdom knows. Wisdom doesn't have to analyze, and it doesn't have to critique. Wisdom knows. So sometime when I'm with people and they ask me a question, I'll give them an answer. And usually it's kind of quick. And they'll say, well, you're too hasty. You haven't thought this through. And the truth is, there's nothing to think about. The answer is there, and the answer came. Why fight with the truth? Why spend additional time? Because people are in their animal, analytic, critical mind. And in that animal, analytic, critical mind, analysis and critique are necessary because that's the nature of it. It doesn't have a place where it's still. It's constantly unsure. And that's where doubt comes from. Part of wisdom is faith. And within faith, there is a knowledge that certain things are true and don't need to be discussed. People without faith have to discuss, is there a God? And they have to critique the question of, if we can't see him, is he really there? If he doesn't contact us directly, is he really there? Wisdom knows that God exists. And we need to reside in that place of wisdom where we know that God exists. And that's when we can find peace. In the animal, critical, analytical, doubting mind, there is no peace. There is a constant rolling of opinion. There is a constant rolling of answers and questions and answers and questions and answers and questions. People somehow were in front of a sheikh, and they were asking, and one man was asking him questions. And the sheikh said to him, if you continue to ask questions, you'll get answers to your questions. But if you sit quiet and just listen, you'll get what you need. In other words, people think that the questions they have are what's actually troubling them. It's not true. What's actually troubling them is their lack of wisdom. And you don't get wisdom through the answer of a question. You get wisdom through a transformation of your being. And to transform your being, you have to sit with the sheikh and get the sheikh's resonance and allow it to transfer into you while you are without doubt, while you are without questions, while you are at peace, and allow the Sheikh's peace to overwhelm your resonance so that your resonance changes into the Sheikh's resonance. What a true Sheikh can do is change your resonance to his resonance. What a true Sheikh can do is take you to the place where he is so that you can become like him. Bawa said to us, become like me. And he spent his life trying to make us like him. He gave his life to us, an hour here, an hour there, a day here, a day there, to do what? To bring about a transformation in the resonance of our being so that we are no longer under the influence of our animal mind and that we leave our animal qualities to enter into the truth of reality. And the truth of reality can only be entered into when we leave our animal minds, when we leave our critical nature, when we leave the need to constantly be judging and coming to conclusions about other people and other things. Judgment has been left to Allah alone. And as we understand that judgment is left to Allah alone, we understand more about ourselves. We understand our limitations. And as we understand our limitations because of the nature that we are, which is created beings, the veils are lifted. As long as we see ourselves as powerful, we have veils. As long as we see ourselves as the actor, we have veils. As long as we are not surrendered to Allah's power, we have veils. The act of surrendering is what removes veils. The act of giving ourselves over to Allah is what removes veils. The Prophet, the Rasul, was known as Abd. Abd ve Rasul, slave and Rasul. So the Prophet was a slave of God, then he was the messenger and the prophet. But first, he was the slave. Now, if the prophet is a slave, then who are we if not slaves of Allah? And we must enter into that phase, into that methodology of surrender. We must begin to give up our thought patterns, our animal mind, our animal insistence, our animal needs, our animal desires, our animal analysis, our animal critiques, our animal judgment, our animal jealousies, our animal hatreds, our animal bloodlust. We have to give all of these things up. And if we can't, then the first part of knowing yourself and knowing God never happens. We'll never know ourselves and we'll never know Allah. So we have to make an intention in this world to be in the world, but not of the world. Simultaneously, in the world, but not of the world. Simultaneously, at the same time that we walk through this world, we are not attached to it. We have intended to be attached to something else. And what is that something else? We have intended to be attached to that natural thing. That thing without beginning and end. That eternal thing. That thing that is grace and that thing that is glory. That thing that is mercy and that thing that is compassion. That thing that is love and the thing that is the sweetness that comes into our being in flashes once in a while that we know is the answer to all of our needs and all of our difficulties. When we know that, and when we focus on that, and when we take our road in that direction, we will be on the path to know our Lord. We ask every day, Allah, take us on the straight path. Don't make us be the ones who've incurred your anger or your wrath. And what is it that incurs Allah's anger or wrath? It's turning away from Him, makes Him turn away from you. Not that He has turned, but you've turned. So in your turning away from Him, you're no longer facing Him. And how do you turn away from Him? By turning towards your animal self and giving your animal self importance and credence, and letting it override your wisdom and your intention to be with Allah. As that's done, we become less and less godly and more worldly. And His qualities and His names, as we turn to the world, become less and less of who we are. So we need to focus on compassion and on mercy. And we need to integrate it into our beings. And this is the first step in beginning to learn the truth of who we are. Understand that we have an animal mind with an animal inclination, with an animal set of inclinations. There's many more than just one inclination. There's all kinds of animal inclinations. Watch animals, watch their inclinations, and then you can see those same inclinations in yourself. And as you see those inclinations, make every effort to do away with those inclinations. It's good to go to the zoo to be able to see some of those inclinations. When you walk in the streets, you can see those same inclinations in people. We need to be rid of the animal self and enter into the godly self. And this is the work of the Sufi path. This is the work of love. But love in the animal world is conditional love. Love in the Sufi world is divine, unconditional love. And there's a huge difference between unconditional love and conditional love. I love this fish because it tastes good. That's conditional love. That's animal love. That's fish love. We have to love for the sake of the overriding love that created all of us. This overriding love that is what holds all of the universe together. We have to find that divine love. We have to allow that to enter us and, in its effulgence, overwhelm our animal mind so our animal mind ceases to have influence over us. Inshallah, God will take us to that place where He is our ruler and where we surrender to Him, where we understand the truth of this existence, not the illusory nature of this existence, where our heart opens and we see reality through our heart and not through our animal mind, where we see reality as the connection between ourselves and God, where we see reality as our step into the eternal, away from the temporary, away from the illusory. May Allah bless us all, protect us all, and take us on the straight path towards Him. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.